Hello everyone, this is Dr. Supriya Singh, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Vasant Kanya Mahavidyalaya, affiliated to Banaras Hindu University. I welcome you to the lecture number 4 of week 3 of the course Understanding Deconstruction, a Critical Approach. And the title of today's lecture is Judith Butler, Deeply Informed by Derridean Deconstruction. Though Judith Butler is not actually a deconstructionist, but she has applied the deconstructionist terminologies upon the working of his ideas and his literary theory of feminist criticism. So we'll see in this particular lecture that how she has applied the deconstructionist approach upon the feminist criticism that she has continued with. So coming to the lecture, let's see that Judith Pamela Butler was born on February 24 in the year 1956. She is an American feminist philosopher and gender studies scholar whose work has influenced political philosophy, ethics, and the fields of third wave feminism, queer theory, and other literary theories. She is not formally a deconstructionist in the strict Derridean sense, but her work is deeply informed by deconstruction, especially in how she critiques the idea of identity, the idea of language and power. She has gave certain terminologies using the tools of Derridean deconstruction. Now, coming to the overview about this particular critic, Judith Butler, we can see that she has critically examined the idea of gender and identity that has reshaped contemporary discussions within feminist and queer theory. Butler is best known for her books like Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, published in 1990, and Bodies That Matter on the Discursive Limits of Sex in the year 1993, in which she has challenged the conventional heteronormative notions of gender, developed her theory of gender performativity, which is quite popular and has been harnessed by other feminist critics. This theory has had a major influence on feminist and queer scholarship. Her work is often studied and debated in film studies course also, emphasizing gender studies and performativity. Now, coming particularly to the works of Judith Butler, we can see that she has talked about Performativity Act and Gender Constitution in the Gender Trouble, where she is not stable regarding the idea of identity, the way deconstruction talks about the instability of meaning, in the same way she is talking about the instability of um, identity in gender. And this particular seminal text critiques the binary of understanding regarding gender and introduces the idea of gender performativity, revolutionizing how we think about identity and related agencies. Now, coming to the other text, that is Bodies That Matter, which is also one of the most relevant or seminal work of Butler, we see that here she is talking or focusing on the materiality of bodies and their relationship to discursive formations. According to her, body is something that is shaped by power dynamics. Here she seems to be influenced by the postmodern critic Michel Foucault. She also talks about the cultural norms, highlighting how these forces or the power dynamics construct our understanding of sex and identity. Now, in one more work that we can see, Undoing Gender, and these three are her popular texts. So, here in this particular text, Undoing Gender, which was published in 2004, she has expanded on her previous theories, questioning the rigidity of gender categories. Here, she also discusses the implication of gender non-conformity and advocates for a broader understanding of identity, emphasizing the need to dismantle restrictive norms that inhibit individual expression. Now we are coming to the key concepts given by Butler, which are scattered in all the three seminal works one by one. So the most popular idea given by Judith Butler is gender performativity. And here we see that this idea talks of that gender is not something what we are, rather gender is something what we do through repeated acts. Because till now we were considering it that gender is something social, which is built according to the socialization process. Now here she comes up with a new innovative idea which can be considered as a deconstructive approach. Perhaps she has used the deconstruction tools in order to come upon this idea, where she talks of that gender is not something social. Gender is not something that it is in the social process, rather, it is something that we perform or we do. So, here she is giving the idea of gender performativity, which means that what we do, how we behave in this society, doesn't matter what our biological or social arena allows us, rather, what we do is our gender. So, gender performativity is something that is based on performance. Now, he also comes up to the idea of gender identity, where she applies again the Derridean notion of trace in the idea of identity, especially the gender identity. And she argues here that what we think of as stable identity, like we often talks of man or women, is something that is constructed because of the repeated social norms. But actually, these identities are not fixed. These identities, if we are considering them as fixed, they are just giving up a binary between man and woman. So she comes up to blur this identity, and she says that there are not just man and woman, rather, there are various fluid categories, and this way we can come up to the idea of dismantling the binary between man and woman. So, this way, she is not rigidly following the idea of identity as male or female, and she says that they are actually constructed through repeated social and linguistic performances. Gender is something that is not innate or original, rather, it is the effect of discourse and performance. Therefore, identity is a trace, not a full presence. So, again, she is taking recourse to one of the Derridean tool, that is trace. The way instead of sign, Derrida has used the term trace, which means that it is blur, it is not rigid, it is not with one meaning, it is not with any fixed identity. In the same way, gender is something that is, according to Judith Butler, very much like trace. It does not have a fixed identity, because identity, particularly the gender identity, is not something innate, rather, according to our behavior in the society, according to our performance in the society, it is something that is constructed. So, this way, she is considering the idea of trace upon identity, and she calls that identity is a trace, not a full presence or essence, but it is a residue of social norms that have been cited and repeated. It is built through the repetition of cultural signs like the dress we wear, the behavior we do, the roles we do, the expectations that society keeps from us. So, in this way, we are categorized under either male or female or something like that. So, this way, it depends upon what we wear, what we are expected to do. So, this way, we are rigiding identity, we are compelling someone, we are expecting from someone to behave in a certain manner through our dress or our roles. For example, women is never a pure presence according to Butler. She says that it's always in flux, always a trace of past performances, expectations, and norms. For instance, if you are or if someone is a woman, she has to behave according to a particular norm. She has to behave according to the expectation of a society. She has to dress and so on in the traditional norms. So if she is doing so, then only she is a woman. So this way we are straight jacketing the identity of a woman. Rather, here Butler comes up to an idea that let one do what or how they want to do. Let them perform what or how they want to perform, or how one want to perform. So this way identity is something that is not rigid, rather it is based on performance, and this way she is coming to the idea of gender performativity, where gender is not rigid, it is not fixed, rather it is based on one's performance, where one is not going by the traditional norm, rather one is doing or performing in the way one wants. So, this way, she says that every repetition is slightly different, never perfect, never fixed, and that is iterability. Gender identity, in the same way, can be different, it can never be perfect, it can never be fixed, and not based on repetitions. So, gender identity is very much like the idea of trace given by Derrida, which is indicating that identity is always unstable, open to variation, as we can see in parody. It is open to resistance. For example, we have drag performance, and regarding drag performance, let me tell you that there are certain comedy shows where we often see how the characters, male characters, they perform as a female, or female characters sometimes perform as a male. So this is something that is considered as drag performance, and here we find that the identity is not fixed because one is ready to change oneself according to the need, demand, and therefore they perform in a certain manner. And this way, this is not a rigid identity, rather, one is able to shift from one to another according to their performance. Now, Butler this way is exposing the unstable foundations of something we take as natural or given, like man or women. So, this way, she is talking about that the identity is something that is unstable. We cannot just go for considering oneself with a fixed identity as man or woman, rather there is something in between. We can talk of third gender, we can talk of a man transforming oneself or performing as a woman, and a woman can also perform as a man. So this is something that is based upon performativity. Now, coming to another concept, we see that she is talking of power, and here she is applying this Foucauldian notion of power upon the body. According to Butler, power is something that produces the body. So, drawing from the idea of Michel Foucault, Butler argues that power doesn't just repress us, it also produces us. Particularly when he is talking about social power, Foucault basically talks of the social power through institutions, language, media, etc., that shapes how we understand and how we inhabit our bodies. According to Foucault, power tells us what a body should look like, how it should move, what it should desire, and what it should be able to do. This means that bodies are not outside of politics. They are very much according to the politics. They are where power operates most intensely. For instance, we can understand it as that in the power notion or in the discourse of power, we come to understand through media, through social institutions, how to behave, how to sit, how to pose, and so many things that can add grace to our personality. We can even go for looking for the trends, trendy dresses, and so on, so that we can add grace to our personality. So, power is working everywhere. Power is nowhere powerless, rather, it is working everywhere in order to understand our body, the moves of our body, and this way, power is something that produces body. It is not always that power curtails us, rather power sometimes also produces us. So here when Judith Butler is talking about that power plays significantly in the making or posing of our body, it produces our body, she is talking about that how power produces us to behave in a certain manner. Now, for example, gender norms shape how bodies are expected to behave, like how a masculine body should be strong, how a feminine body should be graceful, and so on. She continues with the idea that lived experience is this way real, but it is also structured by norms. So, what she is trying to say here is that we have certain lived experience. We think, we feel that we are doing something that is real, that is our real identity. But no, actually, our real identity is something that is made or that is according to the social norms. So, we always act, we always behave, we always pose according to the social norms when we think ourselves real. Actually, there is something of real, but most of the things we learn from the society, most of the things we get from the norms, and that is why, though we think ourselves to be free to behave or pose, but actually we are dominated by the power structure. The way Derrida says that meaning can't be anything, but it moves in its limit, Butler too never denies that we have real felt experiences of our body, our desires or identities, but she adds something to it, that our lived experience are not completely pure or untouched, rather they are shaped by language, by expectations, as well as by cultural or social scripts. So even though we feel gender or identity in very deep, we are still living within a world of norms that guide and constrain those experiences. And this way, she comes to the idea that all gender is a kind of drag. Even so called real gender performances are imitations without an original. Now, why she is showing so? As I have discussed right now, that since we are never pure, the way we are behaving or posing is never pure, because we are always affected, impacted by the norms. Therefore, we are always drag. We are always performing in a drag way. We are not original, rather, we have drag performances that we are doing. So Butler flips the script, saying that drag is not a copy of an original gender, rather, all gender is an imitation of an imitation with no true origin. This challenges the idea of an authentic or natural gender identity. That's not to say that identity is fake, but that it's always being formed in relation to power. And we all know that Foucault's notion of power is something that is productive. It creates knowledge, it creates bodies, it creates norms. The body is shaped by disciplinary system, according to Foucault, where schools, medicine, sexuality, everything plays significantly. And there is no essential self, rather, our self is always commanded by norms. Thus, where Foucault maps how power works, Butler shows how we might twist or disrupt this idea in order to add something more, that power creates gender and the body, but we can add that we can resist these constructions by repeating them differently. Now, the idea here is that yes, power is something that acts upon us, it is something that compels us to behave in a certain manner which we unknowingly go for. But here, Butler adds to it that it is not necessary that we should act according to the norms, according to the power play of the social structure. Rather, we can resist to it also. And this resisting is something where she is using the deconstructive tool in order to disrupt the idea of power produces body. So she enhances the idea of Foucault in order to add this, that it is not just that we are going by power, rather we can also resist power. This way, she blends Foucault with Derrida, that language is not stable. So there's room for play, parody, subversion. There is idea of spectrum of identity, and this way we cannot limit identity, rather we can go with spectrum of identity. Now she further talks of the idea of binary in gender, and she comes to critique this idea of binary gender norms. We have discussed something of it earlier, and let us now continue to what she want to say with this. So Butler's work contests the traditional binary understanding of gender as male and female, suggesting that there is a wide spectrum of gender identities and expressions. So till now we have talked about that how she is disrupting the notion of binary between male and female, because there are drag performances also, because the identity is not based upon the origin, rather it is not also a social construct, rather it is based upon the performances. Now apart from the performances, she is now talking of the spectral identity, she is now talking about the fluid identity, or she is now talking about the idea of Derridean limitrophy, where he talks of that the binary, that the boundary between the two extreme is quite fluid and it blurs the identity. So this way we have a range of identities rather than two extreme poles. So here she argues that the gender binary is a social construct that limits individual agency and expression. Her work explores the role of imitation in gender performance, arguing that individuals learn to perform gender by imitating and internalizing societal norms. However, simultaneously, she also highlights the potential for gender insubordination, where individuals challenge and subvert these norms through their performances. Butler critiques the idea of a stable, unified lesbian or gay identity, arguing that such identities are often policed and fixed both by the mainstream culture as well as by the LGBTQ community itself, because they are asserting their identity. Mainstream is talking about their identity, where LGBTQ is progressing with their own extreme identity. However, she is talking about the range of identity in between, the fluidity of identity in between. And she says that she is wary of identity politics that rely on fixed definitions of what it means to be gay or lesbian. These can become exclusionary and fail to account for the fluidity of desire and gender. So, insubordination this way refers to how queer identities resist norms by disrupting expectations, refusing to conform, refusing labels, refusing to be legible to dominant frameworks. And this way, gender is not innate or natural. Butler argues that what we consider to be feminine or masculine is not a natural expression of biological sex, but rather a set of behaviors where we can't go with any limit, because there are several set of behaviors, there are fluid set of behaviors and expressions that are culturally performed and reinforced. Now apart from this, she also talks of another idea, that is textual analysis and subversion. Here she employs deconstructive strategies again to analyze text, which was there we can see with Derrida. Here, Butler employs deconstructive strategies to analyze a text that has been done by Derrida. She continues to say that perpetuate gender stereotypes. By revealing the underlying assumptions within these texts, she encourages readers to question and subvert dominant narratives surrounding gender. So, the way Derrida has talked to explore the layers of meanings within a text, in the same way she is talking to explore the layers of identity behind gender. And this way, she is not just talking about the male, female, or the gay or lesbian or the third gender or so on. Rather, she is talking about the layers, the varied or various layers of identity behind gender. It is not something that is just visible to us, or the extremes, uh, spaces or points where we can have 4 or 5 types of identities. Rather, she can say that, or she is asserting that there are several identities that we can explore. So we should not restrict ourselves, like meaning we should go on to explore more and more identities, and individual must be free to explore or to locate their own identical identity space. Butler's idea around textual analysis and subversion are deeply connected to her overall theories of gender performativity this way, discourse, the notion of power, and so on. So while she doesn't always use the term textual analysis in the traditional literary sense, she treats gender, identity, and bodies as texts that can be read. So the way we read a text, in the same way, we also read a body in order to get the identity under the gender or the gender roles. So she asserts that there are gender, identity, and bodies as texts that can be read, interpreted, and most importantly, subverted. Now, next, she is this way coming to a similar idea that gender is a text to be read. Butler sees that gender as is something socially constructed, like a text created through language, science, and cultural codes. We read bodies through our gendered expectations, how someone dresses, moves, speaks, etc. These signs are interpreted by society as man or woman. Just like with the literary text, the readings are not fixed. In the same way, the misreadings are possible with gender also. So, gender is not a biological fact, but a socially readable and repeatable performance. Now, she deconstructs the norms through language and textuality, and she goes on to assert that identities are not internal essences but effects of power, and language makes them open to critique and reconfiguration. Textual analysis for Butler involves deconstructing the language, rules, and structures that produce norms like heterosexuality, binary gender, and stable identity, subverting the dominant text of gender by blurring gender identity. So, similarly, Butler believes that subverting the dominant text of gender creates open spaces for new ways of being. There are not just fixed identities, rather, there are open spaces, and one should explore these spaces for new ways of being. She doesn't argue for destroying identity, rather, in the way of Derrida, she is talking for destabilizing fixed identities that limit freedom. Now, we can conclude that Butler's ideas revolutionized feminist thought by introducing the concept of gender as a performance, undermining static notions of gender identity, and encouraging a more fluid understanding. This has led to a broader inclusivity in feminist discourse, particularly regarding diverse gender experiences and intersectionality. Butler's work laid groundwork this way for queer theory by challenging heteronormative frameworks and advocating for the fluidity of gender and sexual identity. This perspective has inspired critical debates surrounding sexuality, prompting scholars to rethink identity categories beyond binaries. And we can conclude this way that gender and sexual identities are not essential truths but constructed performances that can be parodied, subverted, and destabilized. This opens up the possibility for resistance and freedom through the very act of imitating and breaking norms. Thank you.